Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to talk about developers' productivity for cloud native development, and basically I'm going to cover a few tool set which will make your life easier. I'll start with the first tool, that is Visual Studio Code, which every developer has today, and then for Windows desktop users to build application for Linux, we will be using something called Windows Subsystem for Linux, WSL, and then we'll use something in the GitHub not only to store our source code, but also use something called Codespaces, which gives us a browser-based productivity capability in the GitHub as a developer uh, sandbox capability. In the context of development, right, all the tools and everything which we are talking about are mostly freely available, except the fact that Codespace requires a license, but other things you can pretty much use for free, no charge, and just simply download and start using it with your existing operating system. So let's go into the WSL, that is Windows Subsystem for Linux. Now, let me share my screen. So I've just divided the screen into multiple areas, and I'm going to share. So I went into the home page. Now, let me see what all folders I have. Let me create a folder. So if I go ahead and create a folder, and then I go inside that so that I can clean it up later point in time. And then you see that this is the folder where I'll be building some application. Now, before we build that application, I want to show you that this is my Windows subsystem for Linux and running on my Windows 11 machine with running the Ubuntu operating system. And in that operating system, basically I have got everything installed, including Docker. So I have got Docker installed. Need to check whether Docker is working for me. If not, then I have to make some tweak. So I just go ahead and say yes. That means the Docker is not running. So I'll say sudo docker d. That's gonna go ahead and run the Docker. And if that is running, then Docker PS will show up some output. Yes, it is working now. So the Docker is working fine. Apart from Docker, I have something called a .NET. So let me increase the font size. And if I say .NET, you can see that .NET is installed. And if I go ahead and show you the list of SDKs I have, which will allow me to run the build application, then I have got 6 and 7, both in this machine. I'm pretty much fine. Now, just wanted to test how Docker behaves here. If I just check what all images I have, I've got a couple of them, so simply ignore that and go ahead and get a Docker image and run it. To test it, say Docker run hello world. If you do that, then you can see that it is now giving me some output from the container and got terminated. So this is fine. I can even try to use some container like Nginx. So if I say Docker run Nginx, if I just stop it here and don't do anything, it's gonna go ahead, execute it, and come out. And that will not give me an ability to test it. Instead of that, I'm gonna run it in a detached mode, and then it will be running in the background. If I now check Docker PS, you will find one container that is Nginx running with some container ID. Let me copy the container ID. And if I just say Docker exec minus ID, that is interactive terminal, what is the container and what command I need to execute. So what I'm essentially saying that let me get inside that container. open the shell and write something. So to check, because it is Nginx, it has a web page which is running in the local host. I know about the behavior of the Nginx, that's why I can come up with that conclusion. So that is why I can see a raw HTML page being displayed when I run this curl HTTP. So curl is a browser-based, command line-based browser activity. So you can browse the URL through curl command, and it will uh, display the page into your command. So everything is fine, working all right, coming out. And then what I'm going to show you is the dev experience. Inside this demo one folder, I'm going to go ahead and create an ASP.NET application. To do that, I said .NET new and give a name as sample1, and I will use one switch, no HTTPS, just to avoid the development thing where I don't need to deal with the certificate and all. So the template type is web, name is sample1, no HTTP is the command. So it is done. Now I go to the CD, and that's a CD. And then you see that this has got a couple of folders and files created. To open my local Visual Studio Code, I run something called CodeDot. And this essentially will open the Visual Studio code in my machine, pointing to this folder. Now, this is what the first time you have to agree. And you can see that it is pointing to WSL2. That is the Windows 11 version of the WSL running on Ubuntu operating system. So when I configure the WSL, there is a nice documentation available how you configure that. You can choose which operating system you want. So I chose Ubuntu. And then this is the project file, etc. So I can also run things from my Visual Studio. So if I maximize the window and go into this command, I go into this terminal, what I can do, I can just stay here and I say that I want to introduce a Docker file. And to introduce a Docker file into this, first of all, you need an ability to add the Docker file. So there is an extension for that called Docker. So you need to have that extension installed with your Visual Studio Code especially. So if you search with Docker, you see that it's from Microsoft, it's there. I have done the installation. And then because it is a C# project, so I also need a C# extension. So these are the two things you require. Once you have them, right, you go ahead and say Control Shift P. And then you search with, say, Docker, and you'll find Add Docker Files to Workspace. You choose this option, it goes ahead and asks you a few things. It's a wizard-based activity. So clearly, it is a ASP.NET Core application. Let's select that. I'm going to test it or make the container for Linux. Let's go for it. And then I'm going to use the port 5000. Let's go for it. And then you will say that, do you need a Docker Compose? There are multiple Docker files. No, I don't need that. So I go ahead and say no. So the Docker file is generated. All the complex job is done for me. I don't have to write it by myself. Now you can see that when I run it locally, it will run in the port 5000 and map the port back to my local browser. So let's see that experience. If I now say .NET restore, that will restore all the dependencies. It's up to date. And I say .NET run. Now, what this essentially will be doing, it will be building an image, deploying it to this Docker, and then giving me the URL for that. So you can see that it's just 3 times it got open. Let me close and then keep it here. So this is the hello world, which shows from my Docker container running locally and getting deployed from the um, Visual Studio Code. Okay, so this is the development experience. I can keep changing, keep checking, and things will be all fine. After that, I'm going to go here and open the Visual Studio Code and say that let's try to do something. But before I try to do something, I'm going to show you my Docker Hub. So each one of us can go ahead and create a free account in Docker Hub. When you do that, you get a user ID and password which you choose, and using that user ID and password, you can literally log into your console. So what I have done, I've created a Docker Hub user ID password and came to this console and said that I want a login. If you say so, it's gonna go ahead and get your login. If you're confused which login it is making, you can always say that the username is this one. So let's log into that username. Then it will ask you the password. Let's enter the password, and you are connected to the same Docker Hub using the same console. Right, while this is running, let me say Docker PS, that's the Docker container which is running. And if I say Docker images, you'll see that there are a couple of images which is running. Till now, I haven't really built any image. So what I wanted to do is that I wanted to clean up this whole thing and then make it a clean slate. And to do that, what I'm going to do is that say Docker rm and then say execute Docker ps minus aq, and then I say force. That's going to forcefully delete all the running containers. And after that, I run the similar command for RMI, that's for image, and then I say RM. Oh, so sorry. I just need to say that Docker images. Okay. Now, if you run this Docker images, you'll find no image. Docker ps minus a, no thing right. Now, I essentially would be building that container image and then pushing it to that Docker Hub. Let's try to do that. I'll say Docker build, and then I give a name to that image. I can leave it like blank and then retag it, but let's give it at the same time. So use my repository name and the name I want prefer, that is sample1. And I use dot because the Docker file is in this folder. Otherwise, you have to give the full path of the file. So you can see that it's now downloading the base images, building them together, clubbing it all in, and then making a Docker image, which will be available in my local Docker images folder. So the daemon is reacting. You can see that the, the messages are coming in. So daemon is reacting and they're giving the output. So I manually started the daemon because it's not working for in my local machine. Otherwise, you don't need to do that. Done. So I say Docker images. You'll find a couple of images now. It was blank, but this is what it is. Now what I can do, I can simply copy this URL and then go and show you what I have here. So I have got only 4 images. Let me refresh it. I've got 4 in my repository. Okay, I'm going to add the 5th one. That is this one. How do I add that? I say docker push, and then I pass on the image, which has to match with my repository and the name of the image. I can even give a tag with colon, but if you don't give, it becomes latest. Otherwise, you can say colon v1, colon v2, so on and so forth. Now, this is a bit heavy because there are a couple of MBs which needs to be pushed, but it is going to be over pretty soon. Okay. There's some authentication issue I can see in the daemon. Let's wait for the final output to tell us if there is really an error. It's fine, but I don't understand why there is an error. But let's see. The 5th one is getting displayed in the list. Yes, it is. So you can see sample 1, and this is done. Let me test how that sample 1 looks like. Now, if you notice Docker PS, you don't see anything running right now locally in my machine. Let me say docker run -d the image slash nginx. Now, one of the magic which will happen if I do so is that it's not going to go ahead and download from the Docker Hub. Why? Because this image is locally present. That's the beauty of Docker's effectiveness in terms of using the bandwidth, right? So you can see it's saying that it's already existed. A couple of maybe layers will be downloaded, and then this is all available for me. I said Docker PS, and I get to know the ID, which is important because I have not given any name. So I'll use the ID, and I say Docker exec -it, the ID sh, and I say curl local host, and you can see that welcome to nginx is getting displayed. And I say exit, and I'm gonna go ahead and run another that is sample 1. That's the sample 1, and I'm gonna just run the exec with the ID of the sample 1. And if I say curl localhost, there is no curl. I don't think it has. So it's not going to work the way it was working for Nginx because the curl is not installed, right? So that's absolutely fine. Let me try checking the another option. Say exit, and I say bash, if that works. It's not there. Yeah, it's not going to allow me because it's bit thing. So anyways, it's a .NET image, and then there is some limitations in terms of what is there inside the Linux base image. But however, this is now running. I can clearly see it is running, and there is no error. It's not exited, which means it's fine. The moment there is a problem, it'll be exited and it will not be running. So you can see that it's still running. So we're good. We have done the development using the local machine, the WSL, connected to our Visual Studio Code and moved it. Now, let me quickly show you the similar experience. with GitHub through browser. Now this was all local machine. Imagine that you do not have that good local machine with you, so that you have a GitHub account. Now this is my GitHub account, and I can actually go and say that there is a code space. I can create a code space. It's already created, and I can say that open in browser. That's the browser experience. You can even open this code space in your local Visual Studio Code. Now this is the browser-based Visual Studio Code. Looks similar and opening up. So let it load. Right, so I go to terminal, close this, go to this Docker file. I'll get to see the Docker file here. You can pretty much run the Docker build command here if the Docker is running. So if you go into the terminal and I check the Docker PS, if this is running, then you can build the Docker file. It's running, so it's fine. So you can say Docker build dot. You can simply just build it, and it's going to go ahead and give you the same experience. You can also say Docker login and say username is this one, and it's going to go ahead and ask you the password. Log in there, and then is a Docker images. You get to see all the images here, so you can see that the images are displayed here over here, right? And so you can just push the image as you may like to push the image. So Docker build -t, and you can say .net run. That's gonna go ahead and build the thing, and it'll be able to run it. So just like the local developer. So you can see that the browser mapping happens. You click say browser, and it's gonna go ahead and show you the same file. Just in case you doubt that might be wrong one, you can always check. You can say .2, okay, and just say run in browser. So you can say .2 is reflected. Earlier it was having this, now it is .2, so it's fine. Working absolutely fine purely from the browser. Thank you very much. Enjoy your day.